Husband never let anyone else sit in on parent-teacher conferences for our daughter. Not me, not his mother, not once in 3 years. He always had a reason. The first time, I had a stomach bug, and he said he'd handle it. Fine. The second time, I had a work deadline, and he volunteered before I could even look at my calendar. By the third time, I noticed I wasn't being asked. I was being managed. His name was Joel. We'd been married 6 years. We had a daughter, Maisie, who was 8 years old, and by every account I was allowed to hear doing just fine in school. Honor roll. Good behavior. A teacher's pet. Joel always told me with this proud little smile that made me feel like I should be grateful he kept me updated at all. I want to be honest about something. When you're in it, when you're inside a marriage that looks fine from every angle, you don't see the shape of it. You just see the daily stuff. Breakfast. Carpool. Who left the back door unlocked again? I wasn't walking around feeling controlled. I was walking around feeling tired, the way most working mothers feel tired. And I told myself that Joel handling the school stuff was one less thing on my plate. That's what I told myself. The call came on a Tuesday in March. Joel was in Dallas for a 4-day conference, and I was home with Maisie, helping her with the science project about the water cycle. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I didn't recognize the number, but I picked up anyway because I always pick up when Joel's traveling just in case. It was Maisie's teacher, Ms. Aldridge. She had a careful voice, the kind teachers use when they're not sure what they're walking into. She said she was calling because she'd been trying to reach someone in our household for about 3 weeks. She'd set notes home in Maisie's folder. She'd emailed the address on file. She'd left 2 voicemails on a number that, she said, appeared to belong to my husband. I looked at Maisie across the kitchen table, her little head bent over a poster board, coloring in rain clouds with a blue marker. I turned toward the hallway. I asked Ms. Aldridge what the concern was. She paused. Then she said she didn't want to alarm me, but Maisie had mentioned several times over the past few months that she was going to be moving soon, to be with her aunt. She told her best friend she wasn't coming back after spring break. Ms. Polt, her best friend, she wasn't coming back after spring break. Aldridge said she'd assumed it was just a child's imagination at first. Kids say things, but then Maisie had brought in a drawing. A house, a woman with red hair, and she'd labeled it, my new home. I stood very still in the hallway. I said, what aunt? Joel is an only child. I have one brother in Portland, no sisters. Ms. Aldridge said she didn't know. She just wanted to make sure everything was all right at home. She asked if there were any changes in the family she should be aware of. I told her everything was fine. My voice sounded like someone else's. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat down on the floor of the hallway, which is something I have never done before or since, and I tried to figure out what I actually knew about my own daughter's life. Joel and I met when I was 26 at a mutual friend's backyard cookout in Raleigh. He was funny and attentive in the specific way that I now understand was intentional. He remembered things, what I'd said I was stressed about, what my mother's name was, how I took my coffee. I mistook that attentiveness for love. I was not the first woman to make that mistake, and I won't be the last. We got married after 2 years of dating. Maisie came along when I was 29. By the time she started kindergarten, Joel had arranged his whole professional life around being the hands-on dad. He worked remotely as a financial consultant, so he was always home. He did morning drop-off. He attended every school event. He was on a first-name basis with the principal and every teacher Maisie had ever had. People told me constantly how lucky I was. I believed them. What I didn't see, what I wasn't allowed to see, because the information was filtered through him, was that Maisie's teachers had questions he wasn't answering. Her second-grade teacher had flagged a mild reading comprehension gap and recommended a specialist evaluation. Joel had thanked her and never followed up. Her pediatric dentist had sent a referral to an orthodontist. The appointment was never made. These weren't catastrophic things. They were normal, small, parental things that he was simply letting fall, or not letting fall, letting me think were handled. I found all of this out later. That Tuesday, all I had was a phone call and a feeling in my stomach like the floor had just dropped away beneath me. I did not call Joel. I sat with that decision for about an hour, and I realized that if I called him and said Maisie's teacher just called me, I would get a response designed to manage my reaction. He would have an explanation. He always had an explanation. He always had an explanation. And the explanation would be convincing enough that I would believe it for another 6 months. So I didn't call him. I waited. That night, after Maisie was asleep, I went into the home office. Joel's desk was neat in the way that Signal sends intentionality, nothing out of place. Colored folders in a rack. Charging cables coiled. I opened the file drawer and found what I expected to find: tax documents, the mortgage, car registrations. I almost closed it. At the very back of the bottom drawer, behind a hanging folder labeled Insurance Old, there was a manila envelope I hadn't seen before. Inside were papers, legal papers, printed emails, a business card from a family law attorney in Charlotte whose name I didn't recognize. I spread them on the desk and read them in order, very slowly, the way you read something when your brain is trying to reject the information your eyes are taking in. There was an email chain. Joel had initiated contact with his cousin, a woman named Harriet, who lived outside of Charlotte, who I had met exactly twice at family events and barely remembered. Harriet was in her late 40s, married, wealthy, no children. The emails went back 14 months. In the first email, Joel told Harriet that he and I were having serious problems and that a separation was likely. He said he was concerned about Maisie's stability during the transition. He said he had been thinking about what was best for Maisie long term. In Harriet's reply, she said she had always adored Maisie. She said she and her husband could provide stability, a good school district, a safe home. She used the phrase, primary placement, the way someone uses a phrase they have recently learned. The emails continued over the following months. They discussed a school in the Charlotte area. They discussed timing. Joel wrote in one email, and I have read this sentence so many times it lives behind my eyes: Sophie needs to be eased into this. I'll handle the legal part first. Sophie, that's me. I sat in that office chair for a very long time. What my husband had been quietly building over 14 months while I made lunches and drove carpool and thought I was living inside a real marriage was a plan to relinquish his own parental rights and transfer primary custody of our daughter to his cousin. Without my knowledge, without my consent, he had consulted a lawyer. He had selected a school. He had told our 8-year-old daughter that she was going to be moving to live with her aunt. He had told her before he told me. I want to pause here because I know what some people think when they hear a story like this. They think, how did you not know? They think the warning signs must have been neon. I thought that once too, about other women's stories. I thought that before I was one of them. The warning signs were not neon. They were beige. They were small domestic adjustments that each had a perfectly reasonable explanation. They were a man who appeared, to everyone including me, to be a devoted and involved father. The control wasn't visible because it was built into systems I thought were convenience. I didn't cry that night. I thought I would, but I didn't. I took photographs of every document with my phone. I put the envelope back exactly as I'd found it. I went to bed at my normal time and lay in the dark listening to the house and thinking about what I was going to do next. In the morning, I took my C to school. I crouched down before she went through the door, and I looked at her face and I said, "I love you so much. You know that, right?" She said, "Mom, you always say that." I said, "I'm always going to say that." Then I went home and called my own lawyer. Her name was Patricia, and she had been practicing family law in North Carolina for 22 years. My coworker had used her in her own divorce 3 years earlier and said she was the kind of attorney who didn't waste your time. She wasn't warm exactly, but she was clear, and what I needed in that moment was clarity more than warmth. I sent her the photographs before our first call. When we got on the phone, she was quiet for a moment after I finished summarizing what I'd found. Then she said, "He was trying to get you to agree to a custody arrangement that you'd already effectively been excluded from negotiating." I asked her what she meant. She explained it to me carefully. What Joel appeared to have been building was a situation in which, by the time he brought up separation, the custody question would already have a momentum to it. Maisie would already know about the move. Harriet would already have a school picked out. The legal groundwork would already be laid, and Joel, who handled everything related to Maisie's school and medical life, could present documentation suggesting that he had been the primary caregiver, while I had been, from the outside, relatively uninvolved. The school conference notes going unanswered, the specialist referral never followed up on, my name absent from half the school's records because Joel had set himself up as the primary contact. All of it could be used to build a picture of me as a disengaged parent. The beige warning signs had a purpose. They had always had a purpose. I didn't cry in Patricia's office either. I think I was past the crying part by then. I was just very focused in the way that you get when you understand that your child's future depends on how clearly you can think in the next few weeks. Patricia told me what to do. I did it. Joel came home from Dallas on Thursday afternoon. I had dinner ready and I was pleasant, and I watched him hug Maisie and thought about the emails and smiled and passed the salad. He talked about his trip. I asked follow-up questions. Maisie talked about the science project. It was the most normal meal we'd had in months, maybe years, and it was completely false. That night after Maisie was in bed, I told Joel I thought we should talk about our marriage. I said I'd been feeling disconnected for a while and I thought we needed to be honest with each other. He did what I had expected. He shifted into management mode. He said he'd felt it too. He said he'd been meaning to bring it up. He said we could work through it, maybe couples therapy. He was generous and measured, and he said the right things in the right order, and none of it had any warmth in it. I let him finish. Then I put my phone on the coffee table between us and I played the first photograph, the email. The one where he called me Sophie and said he'd handle the legal part first. The silence that followed was the most honest thing that had happened in our living room in a long time. He tried several things. He tried confusion, this is out of context. He tried concern, I was trying to protect you both. He tried anger, you went through my private files. None of it had anywhere to go because I had Patricia in my corner and I had every document photographed, and I had already, 2 days earlier, contacted Maisie's school directly, introduced myself properly, and requested that all future communications come to both parents. I asked him one question. I said, "Did you tell our daughter she was going to live with Harriet?" He didn't answer, which was its own answer. I told him that Patricia would be in contact with his attorney. I told him I was not going to argue or negotiate tonight. I told him he could sleep in the guest room. He looked at me for a long time, and I looked back. I think he was trying to figure out which version of me this was, which pressure point to press. But I wasn't any of the versions he'd mapped. I was someone he hadn't accounted for. I was Maisie's mother, and I was done being managed. The legal process took 8 months. I will not pretend it was easy, because it wasn't. There were weeks where I drove Maisie to school and smiled at the teachers and came home and sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes before I could go inside. There were depositions and document requests and a custody evaluation by a court-appointed psychologist who interviewed both of us and, separately, Maisie. Joel's attorney argued that he had been the primary caregiver and that disrupting that arrangement would harm Maisie's stability. He submitted school attendance records showing his name at every conference, every event. He submitted a letter from Harriet offering a character reference. Patricia submitted the emails. She submitted the unanswered teacher communications that had been addressed to both parents but had only ever been received by one. She submitted testimony from Ms. Aldridge, who described a child who had been told she was moving without her mother's knowledge. She submitted records showing that I had attended every pediatric appointment until the year Joel began working remotely, at which point my presence began to systematically drop off. The family court judge was a woman named Judge Carver. She had a flat, efficient manner, and she did not editorialize, but in her ruling, she noted that one parent had made a deliberate and sustained effort to position themselves as the sole parental authority while simultaneously excluding the other parent from decision-making processes, and that this pattern represented a serious concern regarding that parent's fitness to act in the child's best interest. Joel was granted supervised visitation on alternating weekends. I was awarded primary physical custody. The proposed transfer of custodial rights to Harriet was ruled legally invalid because I had never consented to it. His lawyer filed an appeal. The appeal was denied. I want to tell you what happened with Maisie because I think that part matters most. She was confused for a while. She knew something big had happened in our house, the way kids always know, even when you try to protect them from it. She asked me once, very quietly, on a Sunday morning when we were making pancakes together, if she was still going to go live with the aunt. I sat down next to her at the counter and I said, "No, sweetheart, you're staying home with me. This is your home." She looked at me for a second and then she went back to stirring the batter. She said, "Okay." That okay did something to me that the entire 8-month legal process hadn't managed to do. I cried in the kitchen over a bowl of pancake batter while my daughter pretended not to notice, which is something she is very good at and which I intend to discuss with her therapist someday. She sees a child therapist now, a kind woman in our neighborhood who has a sand tray in her office and does not push Maisie to talk about anything she's not ready to talk about. Maisie has been going for about a year. Last month she told me the sessions are boring, which her therapist assures me is actually a very good sign. Joel and I do not speak except through an app designed for co-parenting communication. He sends logistical messages about pickup times and school forms. I respond with the same. It is profoundly unromantic and absolutely the right arrangement. His mother, and I want to be fair here, because she deserves to be mentioned, called me about 3 months after the ruling. She told me she had not known the extent of what Joel had been planning. She was crying. She said she was ashamed. She asked if she could still be in Maisie's life. I thought about it for a long time before I responded. I thought about Maisie, who loves her grandmother, who spent weekends with her learning to bake biscuits and watching old movies. I thought about the fact that a grandmother's love is real even when a father's was strategic. I said yes, with boundaries that we agreed on clearly and in writing, the way I now do almost everything important. She has honored every one of them. What I know now, that I didn't know 3 years ago, love does not look like control, even when it wears control's clothing very convincingly. Love does not build contingency plans around you without your knowledge. Love does not tell your child she's moving before it tells you. What I also know, the moment I walked into that school and said I'm Maisie's mother, and I need to be on every communication list you have, was the moment everything began to change. Not the lawyer. Not the court date. That moment, in the front office, with the secretary who looked slightly startled and then very carefully wrote down my email address. I reclaimed my daughter's life by showing up, by being the parent who was actually there, not just the one who appeared to be. Maisie is 9 now. She is doing well in school, genuinely well, because the reading specialist turned out to be wonderful, and has worked with her twice a week since last fall. She has a best friend named Ollie, and they're obsessed with a particular series of books about a girl who solves mysteries by talking to animals. She still draws houses sometimes, but she labels them differently now. Last week, she drew one and labeled it Our House. She put 2 figures in front of it, one tall, one small. She showed it to me without saying anything, then she went back to her room. I stood at the kitchen counter holding that drawing for a long time, and I thought, this is what it looks like when the right person stays. I keep thinking about that drawing Maisie made, 2 figures in front of a house, one tall, one small. No labels, no explanation, she just handed it to me and walked away, because she's 8 and she doesn't have words yet for what she was trying to say, but I do. I've been searching for those words for a long time now. What happened in my marriage didn't happen all at once. That's the thing nobody tells you about this kind of betrayal. It isn't a single moment you can point to. It's 100 small moments where someone quietly moved a boundary and you let it go because you trusted them. Joel didn't take anything from me in one dramatic scene. He took it slowly, in the way that slow things are the hardest to see while they're happening. But here's what I've come to understand. The consequences of his choices were just as slow and just as certain. Every decision he made, to exclude me, to deceive me, to build a plan around my daughter without my knowledge, those decisions had weight. They accumulated, and eventually they came back to him in full. Not because the universe is tidy or because good people always win, but because actions that are built on deception are structurally unstable. They require constant maintenance. They need the other person to stay uninformed. The moment I walked into that school office and said my name, the whole architecture started to come apart. I think about the version of me who almost didn't pick up that phone call from Ms. Aldridge, who almost let it go to voicemail, who almost believed whatever explanation Joel would have given me if I called him in Dallas instead of sitting with what I knew. That version of me was not weak. She was just tired, and she trusted the wrong person for too long. The difference between her and the version of me who ended up in Patricia's office wasn't courage in some heroic sense. It was clarity. It was the willingness to look directly at something uncomfortable and not look away. That took everything I had. I won't pretend it didn't. There were mornings during those 8 months where I had to decide, again, to keep going, to show up at every deposition, to answer every document request, to stay calm in rooms where someone was actively trying to describe me as a disengaged parent. Staying steady when someone is trying to rewrite who you are takes a particular kind of strength that you don't know you have until you need it. And I think about Maisie, who is 9 now and doing well, who goes to her therapist and reports that it's boring, who has a best friend and a book series she loves, and a reading specialist who has quietly changed her academic life. Maisie did not need a perfect mother. She needed a present one who showed up, asked the hard questions, and refused to be managed out of her own child's story. That's what I want her to learn from all of this. Someday when she's old enough to hear it, not that the world is safe or that people always tell the truth, but that you can think clearly under pressure, that you can act with integrity even when someone else didn't, that you can keep going when it's hard, not because it stops being hard, but because the thing you're protecting is worth it. She drew 2 figures in front of a house and called it ours. That's enough for me.